Just an old black woman who doesn't know her place. That is what Officer Curtis Blackwell told the duty sergeant loud, unbothered, short-sleeved uniform crisp under the overhead fluorescent lights of Precinct 14 on a bright Wednesday morning after he had escorted Miss Isadora Flemming from the public filing window to a holding cell for what he wrote in the log as failure to comply and obstruction of a lawful process. What that log did not include was that Isadora had walked into the precinct with a noise complaint, addressed every officer politely by sir or ma'am, and had done nothing in her navy pleated skirt and white button-down blouse except exist at that counter with dignity. What that log did not include was the mantel inside her home 12 blocks away, where 2 bronze stars sat in open cases beside the photographs of her daughter Yolanda and her son Raymond. Army captain and warrant officer respectively, both killed in Kunar province, Afghanistan, both posthumously decorated for a rescue mission that saved 11 lives. What that log did not include was that Isadora's granddaughter, Serene Flemming, was at this moment answering questions from 4 journalists at a regional FBI press conference, and that when her phone lit up with Grandma's name, she would leave that podium, badge, and federal authority in hand and end careers before noon. Welcome to Frost Folktales. This is where we tell the stories of those who were underestimated, dismissed, and targeted, yet chose courage over silence. If these stories move you, subscribe and be part of a community that refuses to let them fade into the background. Now, let us go back 20 minutes. Let us go back to the beginning of what Curtis Blackwell's log chose not to say. The walk from Isadora Flemming's front door to Precinct 14 was 12 blocks. She had made it on foot, the way she made most things without complaint, without rush, with her chin level and her handbag on her forearm. It was a bright Wednesday morning, the kind of morning where the sky is so clean and blue it almost looks like someone painted it. The sun came down hard and honest on the sidewalk. She walked past the corner store where Mr. Osai had been selling plantains for 30 years. She walked past the church steps where Pastor Nathaniel Spears swept every morning before 8. He had waved at her. She had waved back. She was wearing her navy pleated skirt and her white button-down blouse, pressed the night before and hung on the door. She had dressed the way her mother taught her to dress when she needed to be taken seriously, because her mother had known, and her mother's mother had known before that. That dignity was sometimes the only armor a black woman was permitted to carry through a door. She had prepared the noise complaint form before leaving home. She had found the form on the city's website, printed it, filled it out in her neat schoolteacher's handwriting block letters for the address fields, cursive for the description. Her neighbor at the building on the corner had been running loud music past midnight for 3 consecutive weekends. She had the dates. She had the times. She had noted that she had spoken to the tenant directly and received no resolution. The form was complete. She had even brought a photocopy, because that was the kind of woman Isadora Flemming was, the kind who made copies. She arrived at Precinct 14 at 9:47 in the morning. The overhead fluorescent lights in the public filing area hummed steadily over a space that smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee. There were 2 officers near the far wall in conversation. A woman behind a glass partition was processing paperwork. And at the public filing window, standing with the particular posture of a man who has decided his shift is an inconvenience, was Officer Curtis Blackwell. He was a broad man in a short-sleeved uniform, his badge catching the fluorescent light from above, a pen behind his ear, his eyes on nothing in particular. He looked up when Isadora approached the window. Something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, not into anything anyone could immediately name. But it shifted. The way light changes behind a cloud that hasn't finished moving. Isadora Flemming placed her completed noise complaint form on the counter and slid it through the window's document slot. She said, "Good morning, sir. I would like to file a noise complaint." Curtis Blackwell looked at the form. He did not pick it up. He looked at it the way a person looks at something they have decided they do not want to deal with. And then he looked back at her and said, "This form looks incomplete." He had not touched it. He had not read a single line. Isadora Flemming, who had raised 2 children and then raised 2 more, who had buried a daughter and a son in the same calendar year, who had sat in a military chaplain's office twice and walked out standing both times, kept her voice even. She said, "Sir, I filled it out completely. The address is there, the dates are there, the description is there. I also brought a copy." Blackwell's jaw moved slightly, the way a man's jaw moves when he is recalculating not the facts but his posture. He picked up the form now. He held it at a slight angle, not reading, performing the act of reviewing. Then he set it down and said, You are going to need to step aside. There are other people waiting. Isadora Flemming looked behind her. The filing area was empty. There was no one. The chairs along the wall held nothing but their own orange plastic. The space between her and the door was unoccupied in every direction. She looked back at the window. She said politely, gently, with the full weight of 72 years of knowing exactly what was happening, "Sir, there is no one behind me. I would like to file my complaint." And that was the moment, that quiet, accurate, unapologetic sentence. That was the moment Curtis Blackwell decided that Isadora Flemming was a problem. He did not raise his voice. He did something quieter and more deliberate. He picked up his pen and opened the intake log and began writing without looking at her. He said, "Ma'am, I am going to need you to comply with my instructions, or I am going to have to note this as a failure to cooperate." She said, "I am cooperating. I am standing here trying to file a legal document with a law enforcement agency, as is my right." He wrote in the log. He wrote carefully. He wrote, "Subject presented at filing window at 0947 hours. Failure to comply with officer directives. Obstruction of a lawful process." He capped his pen. Then he came around from behind the filing window and he took Isadora Flemming by the arm, not gently, not with the practiced courtesy that the department's own training manual required, and he said, "You are going to need to come with me, ma'am." She did not pull away. She did not yell. She said clearly, because she wanted it heard by anyone who might be listening, "I came to file a noise complaint. I have done nothing wrong." There was an officer in the corridor to the left. Officer Amara Diallo. She had heard it. She had seen it. She stood very still, the way a person stands when they are deciding something important, something that will cost them regardless of which way they decide. She watched Curtis Blackwell walk Isadora Flemming down the hallway and did not yet move. But she was watching, and she was remembering. The holding cell was small and smelled like concrete. The bench along one wall was metal. The fluorescent light above it was the same unrelenting brightness as the filing area, no shadows, nowhere to disappear, everything visible and stark. Curtis Blackwell opened the cell door, waited for Isadora to enter, and closed it behind her. He did not explain. He did not offer a timeline. He turned and walked back down the hallway. He stopped at the duty sergeant's station, where Howard Bunch was reviewing the morning's log. Blackwell said it casually, loud enough to carry, unbothered the way only a man who has never been held accountable for anything is unbothered. Just an old black woman who doesn't know her place. Howard Bunch looked up briefly. He did not ask what happened. He did not ask about the detention. He reached for the log Blackwell slid across to him, signed it without reading it, and slid it back. 2 signatures on a document that described Isadora Flemming as a threat to a lawful process. 2 men who never once read the noise complaint form, still sitting on the counter of the filing window, filled out in neat schoolteacher handwriting, with a photocopy behind it. That is what the log left out. In the holding cell, Isadora Flemming did not cry. She had earned the right not to cry a long time ago, in a way no person should ever have to earn anything. She did not beg and she did not yell, because she had never confused volume with power, and she had never confused silence with defeat. She sat down on the metal bench. She set her hands in her lap, one folded over the other. She straightened her back. She looked at the wall. The wall was beige. It had a small scuff near the base where the paint had chipped. The fluorescent light above her hummed at the same frequency as the lights in the filing area, the same hum that had been there when Blackwell dismissed her paperwork, the same hum that had been there when he wrote his lies into the log. Everything was very bright and very still. And then Isadora Flemming began to pray. Not loudly, not with her eyes closed, not with her hands raised, not with any of the outward gestures of supplication. She prayed the way she had prayed at her daughter Yolanda's funeral and at her son Raymond's, the way she had prayed every morning for 7 years while raising 2 children who were not supposed to have to grow up without their parents. She prayed with her eyes open, looking at that beige wall with the chipped paint, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight as a woman who understood that dignity is not a feeling, it is a decision you make with your body, even when everything around you is designed to unmake it. She prayed quietly and steadily and without performance. And 12 blocks away, on her confiscated phone, in her confiscated purse, sitting in a plastic tray at the intake desk, was a contact listed simply as Serene, baby. And Serene Flemming, at this exact moment, was standing at a podium in a charcoal blazer and pressed black slacks, answering questions from 4 journalists, her FBI credentials on the table in front of her, federal jurisdiction in her badge, and 6 years of dismantling police departments in her hands. The prayer was quiet, but what was coming was not. The holding cell at Precinct 14 is not a cruel room by design. It is simply indifferent. Overhead fluorescent tubes burn with the same flat brightness they give to every hour, every face, every story that passes beneath them. There is a bench, a wall, and a door with a small reinforced window. Isadora Flemming sits on that bench with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight, the way her mother taught her, the way she taught her children, the way she taught her grandchildren. She is not crying, she is not trembling. She is praying low and quiet, her lips barely moving, as though she is simply having a private conversation with someone who already knows everything she is about to say. And 12 blocks away, her home sits in the Wednesday morning light, holding every piece of evidence about who she really is. Dolores Marchetti has lived next door to Isadora Flemming for 31 years. She has the kind of friendship with Isadora that requires almost no explanation, the kind built from decades of borrowed flour and shared grief and front porch conversations that run long past sunset. If you ask Dolores what kind of woman Isadora Flemming is, she will not reach for words immediately. She will pause, the way people pause when they are trying to find language large enough for something real. Then she will say, "That woman has carried more than most people could imagine, and she has never once put it down wrong." The living room of Isadora Flemming's house is clean in the particular way of someone who respects the space they occupy. The curtains are white and pressed. The carpet holds the faint impression of a vacuum's last pass. On the far wall, above the television and the family photographs, sits the mantle. And the mantle is where the story of this family begins to become fully visible. 2 bronze stars rest in open display cases, side by side, their ribbons held against dark velvet. They are not decorative. They are not nostalgic. They are evidence. To the left of the cases is a framed photograph of Captain Isadora Flemming in dress, uniform, her posture immaculate, her expression composed, a woman who understood that she was standing for something larger than herself. To the right is a photograph of Warrant Officer Raymond Flemming, not in formal dress, but at a base cookout in Kanawha Province, mid-laugh, his head tilted back, a paper plate balanced in one hand, fully alive in the way that people are alive in the last photographs anyone takes of them. 2 children, 2 wars, 2 flags folded at 2 funerals. Isadora Flemming put both stars on the mantle herself, and she has dusted them every week since. Dolores will tell you she was there for both funerals. The first one, Yolanda's, was the one that rewrote everything. Yolanda was 31 years old when she was killed in Kanawha Province, and she left behind 2 children, a 10-year-old boy named Tobias and a 7-year-old girl named Serene. Their father had been gone long before that, and so the question of where Serene and Tobias would go was never really a question at all. Isadora Flemming went to the funeral parlor, arranged the service, stood at the graveside, and 2 days later had Tobias and Serene's clothes hanging in the spare bedroom closet. She did not discuss it. She simply made it true. Dolores watched her that day. At the graveside, with the honor guard folding the flag and the rifle volley echoing across the cemetery, Isadora Flemming was dry-eyed. She held 7-year-old Serene's hand on her left side and kept her right hand on 10-year-old Tobias's shoulder. Not gripping, not clutching, simply present, the way a wall is present not to trap anything, but to hold things up. Dolores wept. Half the congregation wept. Isadora Flemming did not. She saved that for later in private, in the way that strong people tend to do, not because they feel less, but because they understand that grief has timing and the children needed her steady. Raymond's death came 4 years later, also in Kanawha Province, also in combat. And by then Isadora Flemming had already learned the geometry of this particular devastation. She placed his star next to his sister's on the mantle, and she kept going, kept the house, kept the routine, kept taking Serene and Tobias to school, to church, to the library on Saturday mornings. She made their lunches. She checked their homework. She sat with Serene on nights when the nightmares came, which they did with regularity. For 2 years after Yolanda's death, and she never once suggested to either child that their grief was inconvenient or excessive. She understood that surviving loss is not the same as recovering from it. It is simply learning to carry it without letting the weight show in your posture. This is the woman who walked into Precinct 14 that morning with her noise complaint form already filled out in neat handwriting. This is the woman Curtis Blackwell decided did not know her place. Back inside Precinct 14, in the corridor that runs parallel to the main filing area, Officer Amara Diallo stands with her arms crossed and her jaw tight. She is a second-year officer, young enough to still feel the gap between what she was told this job would be and what she is watching it be. She turns to Officer Greg Powley, who is leaning against the corridor wall checking his phone, and she keeps her voice low because she is not performing this for anyone. She says Blackwell went too far. That woman had her paperwork filled out. She was not obstructing anything. Greg Powley does not look up from his phone immediately. When he does, his expression is the expression of someone who has already decided the cost of caring is too high. He shrugs. He says that is Blackwell's call at the window. Amara Diallo looks back toward the filing area. She does not say anything else to Greg Powley because she recognizes there is no version of this conversation that goes anywhere useful, but she does not let it go inside herself. She turns it over. She files it in the part of her mind where things that matter wait for the moment when they can be acted on. At the front desk, Duty Sergeant Howard Bunch is working through a stack of morning paperwork with the efficiency of someone who stopped reading what he was signing approximately 11 years ago. The detention log for Isadora Flemming arrives on his desk as part of a standard intake batch. The language is vague and procedural: failure to comply, obstruction of a lawful process, detainee escorted to holding. It reads like nothing. It reads like every other log in the stack, and that is exactly why it passes through without a pause. Howard Bunch signs it. He moves it to the completed pile. He picks up the next form. He does not know that the language he just countersigned is a legal document built on a lie, and he does not know that in a matter of hours, a federal judge will be reading it alongside footage from the filing window camera that tells a completely different story. He does not know any of this. He signs his name, and he moves on. Curtis Blackwell is at the break room coffee station when word filters back to him that the old woman is settled. This is the word his mind uses, settled, as though she is a disagreement between neighbors, or a pothole in a parking lot, or a small administrative irregularity that has been smoothed over. He pours his coffee. He thinks about the game on Friday. He does not think about the bronze stars on the mantle 12 blocks away. He does not know they exist. He does not know about the 2 funerals, or the 7-year-old holding herself still at a graveside, or the woman who raised 2 grandchildren alone after the military sent her 2 flags. He knows none of it because he did not ask. He never asks. He decided who Isadora Flemming was the moment she appeared at his window, and everything after that was just paperwork. At intake, when they brought Isadora Flemming in, a young officer took her purse. Standard procedure. He set it on the intake shelf behind the desk, tagged it with a yellow plastic marker, and moved on. The purse sits there now on that shelf, under the fluorescent light, a small navy bag that matches her skirt. Inside it is her wallet with her identification and $43 in cash. Inside it is a folded church bulletin from last Sunday's service. Inside it is a tin of peppermints, the soft kind, because she keeps them for Tobias when he visits, even though Tobias is 32 years old and perfectly capable of buying his own peppermints. This is simply how she loves him, and inside the purse, face down on the shelf, its screen dark, is her phone. The phone is not a complicated device. It does not have many apps. It has a contacts list that Serene organized for her 2 Christmases ago, and it has a home screen photograph of Serene and Tobias at Tobias's college graduation. Serene in a cream blouse and dark slacks, Tobias in his cap and gown, both of them grinning the way people grin when they know they have earned the moment. And in the contacts list, organized not alphabetically, but by the logic of a grandmother who labels things according to her heart, the first name at the top of the list reads, Serene, baby. That phone will not ring on its own. No one at the precinct is going to walk over and dial that number on Isadora Flemming's behalf. The intake officer did not think about it. Howard Bunch did not think about it. Curtis Blackwell has already moved on to his next grievance, but Amara Diallo is still standing in that corridor, turning it over, and she has been a second-year officer long enough to know where the intake shelf is, and she is the kind of person who, when she knows something is wrong, does not wait to be told that she is right. The phone sits on the shelf. The name in the contacts list waits with the patience of something that does not know it is waiting, and in the holding cell, Isadora Flemming prays. Her lips move just enough to mark that the words are real. She has prayed in harder rooms than this one. She has prayed at a graveside in November wind. She has prayed in a hospital hallway at 2 in the morning when Tobias was 8 years old and running a fever high enough to frighten her. She has prayed in the dark after both her children's funerals, when the house was quiet and the children were asleep, and there was no one left to be strong for, and she could finally let herself feel the full weight of what she was carrying. She knows exactly how to speak to God from a difficult place, because she has never had to travel far to find one. She is not broken. A holding cell is not going to be the room that breaks Isadora Flemming. But on the intake shelf, behind the front desk, her phone rests in the dark, and the name at the top of the contacts list reads, Serene, baby. And 12 blocks away, on the mantel, 2 bronze stars sit in open cases, and 2 photographs hold their positions above the television. And the whole quiet room waits the way all the things that matter tend to wait for someone to finally look at it and understand what they are seeing. The skylight above the FBI Regional Field Office conference room was the kind that architects designed to make people feel the weight of daylight. 4 panels of reinforced glass set into the ceiling at a shallow angle, pouring natural light down onto the long oak table, the folding chairs, the small cluster of journalists arranged in a loose semicircle with their recorders extended and their notebooks open. It was the kind of light that made everything look documented. Everything looked permanent. Everything looked like it was already on the record. Serene Flemming stood at the podium in a charcoal blazer and pressed black slacks, and she looked like someone who had been born to stand exactly there. She was 34 years old. Her hair was pulled back smooth and precise, not a single strand negotiating with the morning. Her hands rested on the edges of the podium, the way a surgeon's hands rest before a procedure, still, deliberate. Aware of their own capability, there was a small American flag on a stand to her left, and behind her on the wall was the seal of the FBI's Civil Rights Division, and none of it looked like a backdrop. It looked like context. The investigation into the Meridian County Sheriff's Department concluded with 17 substantiated findings, she said, and her voice carried across the room without effort, the way a voice does when it has never needed to shout to be heard. Those findings have been transmitted to the Department of Justice. We expect formal remedial action to begin within 60 days, and this office will monitor compliance throughout that process. Reporter Lena Kwan, seated closest to the podium in a burgundy blouse and dark pencil skirt, pressed forward. Agent Flemming, can you speak to the timeline? The initial complaint was filed 14 months ago. Does the division consider that timeline acceptable? Serene Flemming did not hesitate. No, 14 months is too long for any family waiting for accountability. The division is currently reviewing its intake procedures for pattern or practice investigations to identify where the timeline can be compressed without compromising evidentiary standards. That review will be complete by the end of the quarter. She did not qualify it. She did not hedge it. She simply said it and moved to the next question. At the far edge of the room, standing with his back against the wall near the door, Special Agent Vincent Hargrove watched the press conference with the comfortable stillness of someone who had stood in that exact spot, in that exact posture, more times than he could count. He was a broad-shouldered man, 6 feet and change, in a dark navy blazer and charcoal trousers, with the kind of build that came from discipline rather than vanity. He had worked alongside Serene Flemming for 6 years. He had watched her walk into rooms where the people seated at the table had more political capital, more institutional backing, and more lawyers than most people encounter in a lifetime, and he had watched her leave those rooms having gotten everything she came for. He was not a man who was easily impressed. He was consistently impressed by Serene Flemming. A journalist near the back raised his hand. Agent Flemming, your office has been described by some critics as overreaching in matters that should remain under state jurisdiction. How do you respond to that characterization? Serene Flemming looked at him for a moment, not a pause for thought, but the kind of look that measures how much a question deserves. The Civil Rights Act does not have a jurisdiction preference. When a pattern of conduct violates the constitutional rights of civilians, federal authority is not an overreach. It is the mechanism the law created specifically for those circumstances. I'd refer your critics to Title 42. 2 journalists wrote that down. The third journalist, a younger man with a press lanyard from a local outlet, asked about the division's next scheduled investigation, and Serene Flemming was mid-sentence. I'm not in a position to speak to ongoing matters, but I can tell you that the division currently has 8 active pattern or practice reviews across 3 states, and each of them, when her phone lit up on the podium, the screen faced up. The room could not see it. Serene Flemming could. The caller ID read, Grandma. She looked at it for exactly 1 second. 1 second was long enough. Isadora Flemming did not call during work hours. This was not a preference or a habit. It was a rule that Isadora Flemming had established herself, quietly and firmly, when Serene had first taken the position. You are busy doing important things. I will not interrupt important things. Isadora Flemming called in the evenings. She called on Sundays. She did not call on Wednesday mornings during press conferences. Serene Flemming looked back at the journalist who had asked the question. "Forgive me," she said, and her voice carried no alarm. No performance of calm, just calm itself. "I need to step out for a moment. Agent Hargrove will be happy to field any remaining questions." She picked up her phone, stepped to the right of the podium with the measured pace of someone who has somewhere to be, and pushed through the conference room door into the corridor. Vincent Hargrove pushed off from the wall and moved to the podium without being asked. The corridor outside the conference room was long and quiet, lit by overhead fluorescent panels that gave the cream-colored walls a clean, even brightness. Serene Flemming walked 6 paces from the door and answered the call. "Hello," she said. The voice on the other end was not her grandmother's. It was a woman's voice, but younger, and tight with the particular tension of someone who has decided to do something and is not entirely certain they have made the right decision. I'm sorry, is this Serene? This is listed as an emergency contact. My name is Amara Diallo. I'm an officer at Precinct 14. Serene Flemming said nothing. She let the officer speak. "I'm calling because..." Amara Diallo started again. "I found this number in an older woman's purse. Her name is Isadora Flemming. She came in this morning to file a noise complaint. She was detained. She's in a holding cell right now. Officer Blackwell logged it as obstruction, but I was there. I saw what happened. She didn't obstruct anything. She just..." Another pause, shorter. "She was polite. She was completely polite the entire time, and he detained her anyway, and I thought someone needed to know." There was a silence on Serene Flemming's end of the call. It was not the silence of someone processing information. It was the silence of someone who has already processed the information and is now organizing it into a structure, the way a person trained in federal law and civil rights enforcement organizes things methodically, sequentially, with the specific weight of what comes next already calibrated. When Serene Flemming spoke, her voice was the same voice that had been at the podium, not softer, not harder, the same, precise and level and entirely itself. "What is the duty sergeant's name?" Amara Diallo answered without hesitation. "Bunch, Howard Bunch. He signed the detention log. I don't think he read it." "Did the desk log include a reason for detention, failure to comply and obstruction of a lawful process? Is Miss Flemming currently in the cell?" "Yes, she hasn't been charged. Nothing formal, she's just sitting there." Serene Flemming let a single beat pass. "Officer Diallo, I want you to understand something. What you just did making this call took courage. I am going to ask you to hold your account until I arrive. Do not speak to Blackwell or to Sergeant Bunch about this call. Do not alter or add to anything in any log. Can you do that?" "Yes, thank you." Serene Flemming ended the call. She stood in the corridor for approximately 4 seconds. The fluorescent lights hummed above her. Somewhere deeper in the building, a door closed. She was already thinking about a preservation hold. She was already thinking about the intake footage. She was thinking about the log language failure to comply, obstruction of a lawful process, and she recognized the phrasing the way a doctor recognizes a symptom they have seen before in other patients, in other charts. In other cases, that did not go well for the people who used that language. She was thinking about her grandmother, 72 years old, sitting on a holding cell bench with her hands folded in her lap, the way Serene had seen her sit in church pews and funeral homes and hospital waiting rooms with a composure so complete it looked like its own kind of armor. She was not allowing herself to feel that last thought fully. Not yet. There would be time. Right now. There was work. She walked back to the conference room door, opened it, and stepped inside. Vincent Hargrove was standing at the podium, answering a question about the division's budget with the kind of practiced competence that required no effort. He looked up when the door opened. He saw Serene Flemming's face. The journalist saw a woman walking back to a podium. Hargrove saw something different. He had known her face for 6 years across a dozen federal cases, across the kinds of situations that bend other people into different shapes, and what he saw now was not distress. It was not grief. It was the specific expression she wore when a situation had crossed from administrative to personal, and she had already made the decision to treat it as both, simultaneously, without letting either compromise the other. He recognized it, the way you recognize the horizon changing before weather arrives. Serene Flemming stepped to the podium and said, pleasantly and without elaboration, "Thank you all for your time this morning. This concludes the press conference. Agent Hargrove and my communications director can address any follow-up requests through the division's press office. Lena Kwon looked up from her notebook. There was a question forming on her face, the practiced instinct of a journalist sensing that a shift in the room means something. But Serene Flemming had already stepped back from the podium, and the word concluded had landed in the room the way conclusions land when the person saying them does not intend to revisit them. Vincent Hargrove picked up his jacket from the back of the chair near the wall. He did not ask a question. He did not say anything. He put the jacket on and walked toward the door, and Serene Flemming was already there, and they went through it together. In the corridor, their footsteps were the only sound. They walked toward the elevator at the same pace, the pace of people who are not running because running is not the point, but who are moving with the kind of purpose that makes the distance between here and there feel shorter than it is. How bad, Vincent Hargrove said. It was not a question about her grandmother's condition. It was a question about what they were walking into. Unlawful detention, Serene Flemming said. Noise complaint, logged as obstruction. She was in a holding cell. She paused one step. She's been in there for hours. Hargrove said nothing for 2 paces, then footage. I'll call for a preservation hold in the car. Judge Albright is on rotation today. I know. They reached the elevator. Serene Flemming pressed the button. The doors opened immediately, as if the building itself understood that there was no time to make these 2 people wait. They stepped inside. The doors closed. The elevator descended, and in the clean overhead light of that small metal room, Serene Flemming looked straight ahead at the panel of floor numbers with her hands at her sides and her face carrying everything she had been trained to carry and everything she had been shaped by loss to carry, and none of it showed, and all of it was there, and both of those things were true at once. The lobby of the FBI regional field office opened in front of them, bright and ordinary. Morning light through the tall glass entrance doors, and they walked through it and out into the day, and the car was exactly where it needed to be, and Precinct 14 was 12 blocks away, and Isadora Flemming was sitting in a holding cell with her hands folded and her back straight, and her granddaughter was coming. The FBI field office parking garage was dim in the way that underground structures always are, but the moment Serene Flemming and Vincent Hargrove stepped through the heavy metal door, the midday sun caught them full in the face. It was still Wednesday morning or barely past it, and the sky over the city was clean and bright, the kind of sky that made everything look ordinary, normal, unhurried. Serene Flemming did not look at the sky. She was already on the phone. Vincent Hargrove unlocked the car with a single click and got behind the wheel without being told. He had worked alongside Serene Flemming for 6 years through 4 pattern or practice investigations, 2 consent decree negotiations, and 1 federal injunction that had made the news in 3 states. He knew what her silence sounded like when she was thinking versus when she was grieving. And he knew what her voice sounded like when she had already decided what needed to happen. What he was hearing now, as she settled into the passenger seat and the engine turned over, was the second kind. "This is Flemming," she said into the phone. Her voice was level, not soft, not hard, level. "I need a preservation hold. Precinct 14. Filing window, intake desk, all footage, all communications, all logs from 0800 this morning to the current hour." "Yes, now I will hold." Vincent Hargrove pulled out of the parking space and pointed the car toward the street. He did not ask where they were going. He already knew. 12 blocks. Serene Flemming waited on the line with the stillness of someone who had learned long ago that urgency and composure were not opposites, they were the same discipline, worn differently depending on what the moment required. She had a charcoal blazer over a white blouse and pressed black slacks, the same clothes she had been wearing at the press conference podium 40 minutes ago. She had not gone back to her office. She had walked from the corridor directly to the garage. The press conference notes were still in her jacket pocket, folded once. "Yes," she said into the phone. "Basis is unlawful detention of a civilian following a routine administrative filing. The detainee is a 72-year-old woman. The logging officer is one Curtis Blackwell. I need the hold executed before we arrive because I am 12 blocks out." A pause. "I understand. I'll need the duty attorney's name and direct number when it's confirmed. Thank you." She ended the call and immediately opened a second contact. Vincent Hargrove watched the road. The city moved past the windows the way it always did, foot traffic on wide sidewalks, storefronts open under natural light, a delivery truck double-parked at a corner. The ordinary world, running on its ordinary schedule, completely unaware that somewhere in it, a 72-year-old woman was sitting on a bench, in a holding cell with her hands folded in her lap, and her purse confiscated, and no one in that building who had thought to ask whether they should perhaps be afraid. Vincent Hargrove had thought about saying something in the press conference corridor, right after the phone call ended, and Serene Flemming had stood there for exactly 3 seconds before her face resettled into something composed and functional. He had thought about saying he was sorry. He had decided against it, not because he lacked the compassion, but because Serene Flemming did not need his sympathy reorganizing her right now. She needed him driving. She needed him ready to move the moment they got out of the car. Comfort was for after. Right now there was work. Hold is confirmed, she said, not to Vincent Hargrove specifically, but to the air in the car. She tucked the phone into her jacket pocket. Outside. Precinct was 2 blocks away now. Serene Flemming looked at it through the windshield without expression. Precinct 14 was a 2-story beige building with wide front steps and a flagpole out front, the kind of institutional architecture that was designed to look permanent and authoritative and faintly intimidating. The sun hit the front face of it directly, no shadow, no softness, just a building in the light. "You want me inside or posted?" Vincent Hargrove asked. "Inside," Serene Flemming said. "I want you on the footage. Request the moment we have a name on the watch, Commander. Don't let the conversation drift from the intake desk records. If they try to offer us a conference room early, take it. We want to be inside the building, not outside it." "Understood." "And Vinny," she looked at him, he glanced over. "If they act like they don't know what this is, let me correct them." He nodded once. "Always do." The car eased into a spot along the curb in front of the precinct. The engine went off. For a moment, neither of them moved, not because they were hesitating, but because Serene Flemming was completing a thought. She was looking at the front steps, at the glass doors, at the ordinary Tuesday-turned-Wednesday architecture of a building where a woman who had buried 2 children in military uniform was currently being held like a nuisance. Then she opened the door and got out. And Vincent Hargrove was right behind her. They walked up the front steps in the full midday sun, side by side, Serene Flemming's pace steady and unhurried and completely purposeful, through the glass doors, into the public lobby of Precinct 14. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed above a waiting area with plastic chairs bolted to the floor, a bulletin board with printed community notices, and a front desk that stretched the width of the room behind a low partition of reinforced glass with a speaking port cut into it. Duty Sergeant Howard Bunch was seated at the desk. He was a large man in a short-sleeved uniform shirt, thick through the shoulders, with the settled, unbothered posture of someone who spent a great deal of time being the first face people saw when they came through those doors and had decided long ago that most of those people were more trouble than they were worth. He was reviewing something on a clipboard when Serene Flemming approached the window. She did not wait for him to look up. "Good morning," she said, clear and audible. "My name is Serene Flemming. I am the FBI's Assistant Special Agent in charge for the Civil Rights Division of this field office." She placed her credentials against the window badge and identification, held flat and steady, long enough to be read without rushing. "I am here to take custody of a civilian detainee currently being held in your facility. Her name is Isadora Flemming. She was detained earlier this morning following a routine noise complaint filing at this desk. The detention was logged by Officer Curtis Blackwell." Howard Bunch had looked up at the word FBI. By the time she was 4 sentences in, the clipboard was on the desk, and he was sitting fully upright with the expression of a man whose morning had just changed shape in a way he did not have a category for. He did not speak immediately. He looked at the credentials through the glass. He looked at Serene Flemming's face. He looked at Vincent Hargrove, who was standing a half step to the side and slightly behind, broad-shouldered, jacket on, not leaning on anything. Howard Bunch's mouth opened and then closed. "I'm going to need to get the watch, Commander," he said. "Yes," Serene Flemming said. "Get him." She drew her hand back from the glass. Her voice was the same temperature it had been for the entire sentence before. "And please do not touch the intake logs or the footage from this morning's filing window." Sentence did not sound like a request. It did not sound like a threat. It sounded precisely like what it was. A statement of federal instruction delivered by someone who already had the legal authority to make it binding and already had a judge's preservation hold on the records in question, and who was telling Howard Bunch not as a courtesy, but as documentation so that if those logs were touched, or if that footage was touched, she would know, and he would know she would know. And the record would show that he had been told. Howard Bunch's hand, which had been moving toward the desk phone, stopped. He placed it flat on the desk. Then he picked up the phone and turned slightly away to make the call. Serene Flemming did not move from the window. She stood in the overhead light of the lobby, hands at her sides, badge back in its holder on her hip, and she waited. The plastic chairs in the waiting area were empty except for an older man in a canvas jacket reading something on his phone. The bulletin board behind her offered information about a neighborhood watch meeting and a lost dog. The fluorescent hum filled the silence above everything. Vincent Hargrove shifted slightly to his left, angling his view toward the corridor that opened behind the front desk, where the building's interior began. He was watching, cataloging, orienting. 6 years alongside Serene Flemming had taught him that the first 3 minutes inside a building told you almost everything you needed to know about how the next several hours were going to go. He noted the interior corridor camera, the direction of the hallway leading toward the holding area, the small laminated sign that said intake LOG and pointed left. He noted all of it and said nothing. Howard Bunch finished his call and replaced the receiver. "Watch commander's on his way up," he said. His voice had dropped half a register since she'd first walked in. It had the quality of someone who had said something and was now not entirely sure if he had said the right thing. "Thank you, Sergeant," Serene Flemming said. There was a door at the back of the desk area, a heavy interior door with a small reinforced window, and it opened after 30 seconds. The man who came through it was wearing a uniform with a lieutenant's bar on the collar and the slightly rushed look of someone who had come from a room where he had been doing something entirely different and was still assembling his full picture of what had pulled him out of it. Lieutenant Douglas Prout was a man in his early 50s with a straight posture and the kind of face that had probably looked authoritative for most of his career. He came through the door looking at Howard Bunch first, then shifted his eyes to the window, to the lobby, to the two people standing on the public side of the partition. He saw Serene Flemming. He saw the badge on her hip. He looked at the credentials card she was already holding up a second time, clearly, so there would be no claim later that he hadn't seen it. And every version of composure that Lieutenant Douglas Prout had walked through that door carrying went somewhere else very quickly. He did not go pale the way a man goes pale in a movie dramatically, with a sharp breath. He went pale the way men go pale when something real has arrived and they understand it, gradually from the inside, as the implications of the next several hours began to arrange themselves in his mind. His jaw did not slacken. His posture did not break, but the color left his face in the way that color leaves a thing when the light behind it goes out. And what remained in his expression behind whatever professional composure he was now assembling at speed was the very specific blankness of a man who knew what a federal credential in this particular lobby, on this particular morning, meant for this particular building. Serene Flemming looked at him through the glass and said nothing yet. She let him look. She let the morning hold still for exactly one breath. And then she said, "Lieutenant, thank you for coming out. My name is Serene Flemming. I'm the FBI's Assistant Special Agent in charge for civil rights. I believe we have some things to discuss." The FBI field office parking garage was dim in the way that underground structures always are, but the moment Serene Flemming and Vincent Hargrove stepped through the heavy metal door, the midday sun caught them full in the face. It was still Wednesday morning or barely past it, and the sky over the city was clean and bright, the kind of sky that made everything look ordinary, normal, unhurried. Serene Flemming did not look at the sky. She was already on the phone. Vincent Hargrove unlocked the car with a single click and got behind the wheel without being told. He had worked alongside Serene Flemming for 6 years through 4 pattern or practice investigations, 2 consent decree negotiations, and 1 federal injunction that had made the news in 3 states. He knew what her silence sounded like when she was thinking versus when she was grieving. And he knew what her voice sounded like when she had already decided what needed to happen. What he was hearing now, as she settled into the passenger seat and the engine turned over, was the second kind. "This is Flemming," she said into the phone. Her voice was level, not soft, not hard, level. "I need a preservation hold. Precinct 14. Filing window, intake desk, all footage, all communications, all logs from 0800 this morning to the current hour." "Yes, now I will hold." Vincent Hargrove pulled out of the parking space and pointed the car toward the street. He did not ask where they were going. He already knew. 12 blocks. Serene Flemming waited on the line with the stillness of someone who had learned long ago that urgency and composure were not opposites, they were the same discipline, worn differently depending on what the moment required. She had a charcoal blazer over a white blouse and pressed black slacks. The same clothes she had been wearing at the press conference podium 40 minutes ago. She had not gone back to her office. She had walked from the corridor directly to the garage. The press conference notes were still in her jacket pocket, folded once. "Yes," she said into the phone. "Basis is unlawful detention of a civilian following a routine administrative filing. The detainee is a 72-year-old woman. The logging officer is one Curtis Blackwell. I need the hold executed before we arrive because I am 12 blocks out." A pause. "I understand. I'll need the duty attorney's name and direct number when it's confirmed. Thank you." She ended the call and immediately opened a second contact. Vincent Hargrove watched the road. The city moved past the windows the way it always did, foot traffic on wide sidewalks, storefronts open under natural light, a delivery truck double-parked at a corner. The ordinary world, running on its ordinary schedule, completely unaware that somewhere in it, a 72-year-old woman was sitting on a bench in a holding cell with her hands folded in her lap and her purse confiscated, and no one in that building who had thought to ask whether they should perhaps be afraid. Vincent Hargrove had thought about saying something in the press conference corridor, right after the phone call ended, and Serene Flemming had stood there for exactly 3 seconds before her face resettled into something composed and functional. He had thought about saying he was sorry. He had decided against it, not because he lacked the compassion, but because Serene Flemming did not need his sympathy reorganizing her right now. She needed him driving. She needed him ready to move the moment they got out of the car. Comfort was for after. Right now there was work. "Hold is confirmed," she said, not to Vincent Hargrove specifically, but to the air in the car. She tucked the phone into her jacket pocket. Outside. Precinct was 2 blocks away now. Serene Flemming looked at it through the windshield without expression. Precinct 14 was a 2-story beige building with wide front steps and a flagpole out front, the kind of institutional architecture that was designed to look permanent and authoritative and faintly intimidating. The sun hit the front face of it directly, no shadow, no softness, just a building in the light. "You want me inside or posted?" Vincent Hargrove asked. "Inside," Serene Flemming said. "I want you on the footage. Request the moment we have a name on the watch, Commander. Don't let the conversation drift from the intake desk records. If they try to offer us a conference room early, take it. We want to be inside the building, not outside it." "Understood." "And Vinny," she looked at him. He glanced over. "If they act like they don't know what this is, let me correct them." He nodded once. "Always do." The car eased into a spot along the curb in front of the precinct. The engine went off. For a moment, neither of them moved, not because they were hesitating, but because Serene Flemming was completing a thought. She was looking at the front steps, at the glass doors, at the ordinary Tuesday-turned-Wednesday architecture of a building where a woman who had buried 2 children in military uniform was currently being held like a nuisance. Then she opened the door and got out. And Vincent Hargrove was right behind her. They walked up the front steps in the full midday sun, side by side, Serene Flemming's pace steady and unhurried and completely purposeful, through the glass doors, into the public lobby of Precinct 14. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed above a waiting area with plastic chairs bolted to the floor, a bulletin board with printed community notices, and a front desk that stretched the width of the room behind a low partition of reinforced glass with a speaking port cut into it. Duty Sergeant Howard Bunch was seated at the desk. He was a large man in a short-sleeved uniform shirt, thick through the shoulders, with the settled, unbothered posture of someone who spent a great deal of time being the first face people saw when they came through those doors and had decided long ago that most of those people were more trouble than they were worth. He was reviewing something on a clipboard when Serene Flemming approached the window. She did not wait for him to look up. "Good morning," she said, clear and audible. "My name is Serene Flemming. I am the FBI's Assistant Special Agent in charge for the Civil Rights Division of this field office." She placed her credentials against the window badge and identification, held flat and steady, long enough to be read without rushing. "I am here to take custody of a civilian detainee currently being held in your facility. Her name is Isadora Flemming. She was detained earlier this morning following a routine noise complaint filing at this desk. The detention was logged by Officer Curtis Blackwell." Howard Bunch had looked up at the word FBI. By the time she was 4 sentences in, the clipboard was on the desk, and he was sitting fully upright with the expression of a man whose morning had just changed shape in a way he did not have a category for. He did not speak immediately. He looked at the credentials through the glass. He looked at Serene Flemming's face. He looked at Vincent Hargrove, who was standing a half step to the side and slightly behind, broad-shouldered, jacket on, not leaning on anything. Howard Bunch's mouth opened and then closed. "I'm going to need to get the watch, Commander," he said. "Yes," Serene Flemming said. "Get him." She drew her hand back from the glass. Her voice was the same temperature it had been for the entire sentence before. "And please do not touch the intake logs or the footage from this morning's filing window." Sentence did not sound like a request. It did not sound like a threat. It sounded precisely like what it was. A statement of federal instruction delivered by someone who already had the legal authority to make it binding and already had a judge's preservation hold on the records in question, and who was telling Howard Bunch not as a courtesy but as documentation so that if those logs were touched, or if that footage was touched, she would know, and he would know she would know. And the record would show that he had been told. Howard Bunch's hand, which had been moving toward the desk phone, stopped. He placed it flat on the desk. Then he picked up the phone and turned slightly away to make the call. Serene Flemming did not move from the window. She stood in the overhead light of the lobby, hands at her sides, badge back in its holder on her hip, and she waited. The plastic chairs in the waiting area were empty except for an older man in a canvas jacket reading something on his phone. The bulletin board behind her offered information about a neighborhood watch meeting and a lost dog. The fluorescent hum filled the silence above everything. Vincent Hargrove shifted slightly to his left, angling his view toward the corridor that opened behind the front desk, where the building's interior began. He was watching, cataloging, orienting. 6 years alongside Serene Flemming had taught him that the first 3 minutes inside a building told you almost everything you needed to know about how the next several hours were going to go. He noted the interior corridor camera, the direction of the hallway leading toward the holding area, the small laminated sign that said intake LOG and pointed left. He noted all of it and said nothing. Howard Bunch finished his call and replaced the receiver. "Watch Commander's on his way up," he said. His voice had dropped half a register since she'd first walked in. It had the quality of someone who had said something and was now not entirely sure if he had said the right thing. "Thank you, Sergeant," Serene Flemming said. There was a door at the back of the desk area, a heavy interior door with a small reinforced window, and it opened after 30 seconds. The man who came through it was wearing a uniform with a lieutenant's bar on the collar and the slightly rushed look of someone who had come from a room where he had been doing something entirely different and was still assembling his full picture of what had pulled him out of it. Lieutenant Douglas Prout was a man in his early 50s with a straight posture and the kind of face that had probably looked authoritative for most of his career. He came through the door looking at Howard Bunch first, then shifted his eyes to the window, to the lobby, to the two people standing on the public side of the partition. He saw Serene Flemming. He saw the badge on her hip. He looked at the credentials card she was already holding up a second time, clearly, so there would be no claim later that he hadn't seen it. And every version of composure that Lieutenant Douglas Prout had walked through that door carrying went somewhere else very quickly. He did not go pale the way a man goes pale in a movie dramatically, with a sharp breath. He went pale the way men go pale when something real has arrived and they understand it, gradually from the inside, as the implications of the next several hours began to arrange themselves in his mind. His jaw did not slacken. His posture did not break. But the color left his face in the way that color leaves a thing when the light behind it goes out. And what remained in his expression behind whatever professional composure he was now assembling at speed was the very specific blankness of a man who knew what a federal credential in this particular lobby, on this particular morning, meant for this particular building. Serene Flemming looked at him through the glass and said nothing yet. She let him look. She let the morning hold still for exactly one breath. And then she said, "Lieutenant, thank you for coming out. My name is Serene Flemming. I'm the FBI's Assistant Special Agent in charge for civil rights. I believe we have some things to discuss." The conference room at Precinct 14 had been designed to feel reassuring. A long rectangular table with 8 chairs, a window facing the parking lot where afternoon sunlight came through in clean, flat panels, a whiteboard at one end with a marker tray that still held 3 dry markers and one that worked. Lieutenant Douglas Prout had led them here with the practiced calm of a man trying very hard to appear as though nothing had gone wrong on his watch. He had offered the room like a gift, a gesture of cooperation, a place to sit down and talk things through. Special Agent Vincent Hargrove looked at the room, looked at the window, pulled out a chair on the side facing the door, and set his recorder on the table. It was no longer a conference room. It was a federal documentation space. And the difference between those two things would matter enormously in the weeks ahead. Miss Isadora Flemming sat across from Vincent Hargrove in her navy pleated skirt and white button-down blouse, both of which had spent several hours in a holding cell and showed not a single sign of it. Her purse had been returned to her at Serene's specific and recorded request. Her noise complaint form, still filled out in neat handwriting, sat on the table in front of her because Hargrove had asked her to bring it, and she had produced it from her purse without ceremony. As though she had known all along it would be needed, Hargrove introduced himself by full name and title, stated the date, the time, and the location for the recording, and then he asked Isadora Flemming if she was comfortable, not as a formality. He looked at her directly when he asked. She told him she was fine. She told him she had sat in worse chairs at worse times. He believed her completely. "Mrs. Flemming," he said, "I'd like you to take me through this morning from the beginning. Start with when you left your house." Isadora Flemming folded her hands on the table, looked at the recorder the way a woman looks at something she has decided to trust, and began. She told him she left her home at 8:47 in the morning. She knew the time because she had checked her watch before locking the front door, as she always did, because she was the kind of person who checked. She told him she had taken the number 9 bus to the corner of Palmer and 5th and walked 3.5 blocks north to the precinct, arriving at 9:14. She knew this because the clock above the filing window read 9:14 when she approached the counter, and she had made a note of it mentally because she had been told by a neighbor that the filing window closed for internal processing between 9 and 9:15 some mornings, and she wanted to be sure she was on time. Hargrove wrote this down. He did not interrupt. She told him she had greeted Officer Amara Diallo, who was passing through the public area when she entered, and she had said good morning. Diallo had said good morning in return and held the inner door briefly so it would not swing back on her. She told him she had approached Officer Curtis Blackwell at the filing window and placed her completed noise complaint form on the counter and said, "Good morning, sir. I'd like to file this noise complaint for the address on the form." She told him what Blackwell said. She told him in order. She did not reconstruct or approximate. She repeated his words with the precision of a woman who had understood, the moment those words left his mouth, that she would need to remember them exactly. When she got to the part where Blackwell told her to step aside, she paused, not because she was distressed, but because she was being careful to get the wording right. She said, "He told me to step aside for other filers." Those were his words, "Step aside for other filers." There were no other filers. The area behind me was empty. I turned to check because I thought I may have missed someone. I had not. Hargrove said, "And what did you say in response?" She told him she said, calmly and without raising her voice, that she had the right to file the complaint and she would like to do so. She told him she said it only once. She told him what happened after that. Hargrove's pen moved steadily across the page. He asked his questions at measured intervals. He did not lead her. He did not fill silences with suggestions. He let her speak. And Isadora Flemming spoke with the unhurried precision of a woman who had learned, somewhere in 72 years of being exactly who she was in a world that frequently underestimated her, that careful speech is its own form of power. She was not exceptional this morning. She was herself. And herself was more than enough. 31 minutes into the account, Vincent Hargrove looked at the recorder and said, clearly, "For the record, the witness has identified the completed noise complaint form, case reference number handwritten in the top right corner, date stamped 9:06 a.m. by the precinct's own automated intake clock." He slid the form back across the table so Isadora Flemming could review it. She looked at it and nodded. He entered it as Exhibit 1. She had done everything right, every single thing. She had arrived on time, with paperwork completed, with a reference number, and the precinct's own clock had stamped the form 9 minutes before Blackwell logged her for obstruction. Hargrove let the silence sit for a moment. Then he asked if she needed water. She said she would not mind. He got up and found a paper cup and a water cooler in the hallway and brought it back without asking anyone's permission and without making it a production. He set it in front of her and she thanked him and drank half of it. "You're doing very well," he said. She looked at him with the measured dignity of a woman who did not require that to be said, but understood it was said kindly. "I know," she told him. Down the hall, in a room that was smaller and had no window, Serene Flemming sat across from Lieutenant Douglas Prout and a man named Gerald Ashby, who was introduced as the precinct's legal liaison. Ashby had a yellow legal pad, a pen he had not yet uncapped, and the expression of a man who had received a call 20 minutes ago that he had not been prepared for. Serene Flemming had a manila folder. She had opened it once when she first sat down. She had not needed to open it again. She laid out the federal exposure the way an architect lays out a floor plan, deliberately, with reference to specific points. She did not raise her voice because she did not need to. The framework did not require her to be angry. It required her to be accurate, and she was. She said, "What occurred this morning constitutes unlawful detention of a civilian who was engaged in a lawful civic process. The detaining officer logged the interaction as obstruction of a lawful process. The intake timestamp on the civilian's own paperwork predates the log entry by 9 minutes, which means the paperwork was complete and on the counter before the log was written. That is a documentation discrepancy that will not survive a federal review," she said. Under Title 42, Section 9083, a civil rights complaint has been initiated on behalf of Miss Isadora Flemming. This is not a threat of future action. The complaint has been initiated. It is on record as of 11:22 this morning, she said, depending on what the intake logs show for the last 24 months at this filing window. This morning's incident may qualify for pattern or practice review under the Violent Crime Control Act. That determination is not mine to make alone, but I am here to tell you that the review process has been triggered. Pruitt said carefully that there may have been a miscommunication with Officer Blackwell, that the morning had been busy, that he personally regretted any distress caused to the civilian. Serene Flemming let him finish. She said, "I appreciate that. I need the personnel file of Officer Curtis Blackwell and the detention logs from the public filing desk for the last 24 months. Ashby uncapped his pen. He said that producing personnel files was a matter requiring departmental authorization, that he was not in a position to expedite unilaterally, and that the retention logs were internal administrative documents subject to department review before external access could be granted, and that he understood the urgency here, but there were procedures, and those procedures existed for valid reasons, and he was sure they could find a path forward that respected both the federal interest and the department's own administrative process, which would take Serene Flemming open the manila folder. She placed a single document on the table. She turned it so Ashby could read the header without picking it up. He read it. He picked it up anyway. He read it again. It was a preservation and production order signed by Federal District Judge Carolyn Waite. It had been signed at 10:51 a.m. Serene Flemming had requested it by phone during the drive from the FBI field office to the precinct. She had the duty attorney on the line for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Order covered all intake logs, all footage, all communications, all personnel records pertaining to the public filing desk at Precinct 14 for the preceding 24 months. Ashby set the document down. The room went quiet. Pruitt looked at the order. He looked at Serene Flemming. He said nothing. She said, "The production deadline is on the second page. I'd like to start with the footage from the filing window this morning and the intake log as written by Officer Blackwell. We can proceed from there." She closed the folder. Officer Amara Diallo was interviewed separately in the same conference room after Isadora Flemming's deposition concluded. Hargrove conducted her interview with the same recorder running. Diallo sat in a short-sleeved uniform, her hands flat on the table, and told the truth without embellishment or hesitation. She stated what she had observed. She stated that she had found the emergency contact in Miss Flemming's confiscated property. She stated that she had made the decision to call that contact and that she had made it knowingly, understanding that it was outside standard protocol and that she was prepared to stand by it. Hargrove asked her if anyone had pressured her not to make the call. She said no. She said she had not given anyone the opportunity. He asked if she had experienced any retaliation since the call became known within the precinct. She said she had received 2 text messages from a colleague she did not name, suggesting she had made a mistake. She had not responded to either message. She had saved both. Hargrove asked her to forward those messages to his number before she left the building. She said she already had them on a separate screenshot. She handed him her phone. He forwarded the screenshots to his own number and handed it back. He told her that her account was now part of the federal record and was protected under the whistleblower provisions attached to the preservation order. She nodded once. She asked if there was anything else she needed to provide. He told her she had been thorough. She thanked him and left the room the way she had entered it, quietly, without performance. Because Amara Diallo understood that doing the right thing was not an event. It was a decision, and she had made it, and now it was done. At 2:47 p.m., Serene Flemming walked out of the precinct through the public entrance into the full afternoon sunlight. The parking lot held 6 cars and 1 news van that had not been there when she arrived. She did not look at the van. She walked to the far edge of the sidewalk, where the sun hit the concrete in a flat, bright panel, and she stopped. She stood there for a moment. Just stood. The professional discipline that had carried her through 4 hours of controlled, methodical federal work did not crack. It did not need to. It simply stepped back for a moment and let her breathe. She took her phone from her jacket pocket and found the contact, Tobias Flemming. She pressed call. He answered on the second ring. She said, "Toby, it's me. Grandma's okay." She paused. "She's safe. She's sitting in a conference room with Agent Hargrove eating a sandwich he got from the vending machine." And she told him it tasted like cardboard wrapped in plastic, and he told her she wasn't wrong. There was a sound on the other end of the line that was not quite a word. "I know," Serene said, "I know." She looked up at the sky over the parking lot, at the clean flat blue of it, at the sun sitting high and indifferent above all of it. "Curtis Blackwell has a federal civil rights complaint filed against him," she said. "The duty sergeant is in the investigative record. We have a production order for 24 months of intake logs. We'll see what they show, but Tobias." She paused. She walked out of that holding cell with her back straight and her purse on her arm. She sat down and gave the most precise deposition I have ever seen a non-attorney give in my career. Every word Blackwell said to her, in order, with timestamps. She let that sit. "She is Grandma," Serene said. "She was always going to be okay. But I needed you to hear it from me." Tobias said something then that only a brother says to a sister after a day like this, something quiet and true and not meant for anyone else. Serene Flemming said, "Come home soon." She ended the call. She stood in the sunlight another 30 seconds. Then she put her phone in her pocket, straightened her charcoal blazer, and walked back inside to finish what she had come here to do. The conference room at Precinct 14 had been designed to make people feel managed. There was a long table with 8 chairs that nobody ever used all at once, a whiteboard with someone's old precinct shift schedule still ghosted into the surface, and overhead fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency just slightly above comfortable. A window on the north wall let in a slice of afternoon light, not enough to soften anything, just enough to remind you that the world outside was still moving. Serene Flemming sat at one end of the table with her jacket on. She had not taken it off since she walked into this building. That was not an accident. Vincent Hargrove sat to her left, his laptop open, his sleeves rolled to the forearm, his physique squared into the chair like a man who expected the chair to hold. The FBI duty attorney, Marcus Delroy, joined them by secure video link on a second laptop, propped at the table's center, a careful man in his late 40s, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and a notepad already half-filled with handwritten notes from the last 2 hours of documentation. The precinct's 24-month detention logs had been printed and delivered 15 minutes ago by a pale administrative assistant who had not made eye contact with anyone in the room. The stack was exactly what Serene Flemming had asked for, organized by date, intake officer designation, filing window assignment, and detention outcome. 143 pages. Serene Flemming did not start at the beginning. She started at the pattern. Vincent Hargrove had already flagged 6 entries by the time she reached page 12. By page 29, they had found 9. By the time Marcus Delroy asked from the laptop screen if they were seeing what he thought they were seeing, they had 14 civilian detentions at the filing window, all logged under nearly identical language. Failure to comply, obstruction of a lawful process, all released within 2 to 4 hours, no charges filed, no follow-up listed, no supervisor review noted, and in the column marked detaining officer, a single badge number appeared beside 8 of the 14 entries, Curtis Blackwell's. The other 6 were distributed across 3 different officers, but the language was the same word for word, in some cases as if it had been passed down not as a policy, but as a habit, a shorthand, a way of handling people who asked too many questions at the wrong window. Serene Flemming set down the log she was holding. She did not say anything for a moment. She looked at the ceiling, which was the fluorescent light above her and nothing else, and she let the full weight of what she was reading settle into something she could carry without dropping it. 14, Marcus Delroy said from the laptop. Majority black, majority over 60, majority, Vincent Hargrove repeated quietly, the word carrying its own indictment. Serene Flemming looked back at the logs. "Flag it for pattern or practice review," she said. Her voice was even. "The filing window's intake procedures for the last 24 months, all supervising officers on shift during each flagged detention, Blackwell's full file, and the duty sergeant logs for each corresponding date." She paused. "Every one of those 14 people deserves to have their name in a federal record that tells the truth about what happened to them." Marcus Delroy was already writing. Vincent Hargrove opened a second window on his laptop and began drafting the referral language. The thing about a pattern or practice review was that it did not ask whether one officer behaved badly. It asked whether a culture permitted it, whether the institution's procedures, its training, its silence, and its signatures created the conditions under which a 72-year-old woman with a completed noise complaint form could be escorted to a holding cell before 10 in the morning and held there for hours while the log described her as an obstruction. The investigation would not end with Curtis Blackwell. It would begin with him and move outward in every direction, through every signature on every detention log, until the full shape of the thing was visible and recorded and impossible to put back in the dark. Serene Flemming understood this. She had opened 3 pattern or practice reviews in her career. She knew what they cost institutions, and she knew what they gave communities. She filed the referral without hesitation. Curtis Blackwell was brought into the conference room 20 minutes later. He came in wearing his short-sleeved uniform, his jaw set, his posture carrying the specific stiffness of a man who had spent the last 3 hours preparing to be reasonable about something he was not willing to admit was wrong. His union representative, a compact man named Gerald Foss, sat beside him with a yellow legal pad. Serene Flemming introduced herself again by title. She introduced Marcus Delroy, present via the laptop screen. She informed Curtis Blackwell that this was a formal interview, that it was being recorded, and that anything he said was part of the federal record. Then she asked him to describe the events of that morning in his own words. He was defensive first. He described Isadora Flemming as uncooperative. He used the word agitated. He said she had refused to follow the intake procedure and that he had been required to log it for the safety of the filing area. His voice had the particular texture of a man who had told himself the same story enough times that he had begun to believe it required no examination. Serene Flemming listened. She did not interrupt. She let him finish completely. Then she placed the first document on the table in front of him. It was the footage timestamp analysis from the filing window camera. Timestamped entry, 9:04 a.m. Miss Isadora Flemming, navy pleated skirt, white button-down blouse, approaching the window with a form already in hand. Timestamped detention log entry, 9:17 a.m. 13 minutes. Serene Flemming had watched the footage with Vincent Hargrove before this interview. There was no agitation on the footage. There was an elderly woman presenting paperwork and an officer who never looked at it. She placed the second document on the table. Isadora Flemming's written account, taken by Vincent Hargrove in the same conference room 1 hour ago. It was 2 pages, handwritten in the same neat script that had filled out the noise complaint form. It included specific language, specific sequence, specific times. It included the words Curtis Blackwell had said to Duty Sergeant Howard Bunch before any paperwork had been reviewed. "Just an old black woman who doesn't know her place." Blackwell looked at the document. He became dismissive. He said his words had been taken out of context. He said the account was one-sided. Gerald Foss put a hand on the table and leaned forward slightly. Serene Flemming placed the third document on the table. It was a 24-page summary of the detention log review with the 14 flagged entries highlighted and a comparative language analysis attached. 8 of the 14 entries bore his badge number. The language in his logs matched, in several cases word for word, entries from officers who had trained under his watch. Blackwell looked at the documents. He looked at the footage timestamp. He looked at the written account. He looked at the pattern summary. And then he said nothing. Not because he had run out of defenses, but because he understood in the specific, quiet way that a person understands something they cannot undo, that there was nothing left to say that would help him. The documents on the table were not accusations waiting to be answered. They were a record. They were already true. They had already been signed and time-stamped and transmitted to a federal server in a building 12 miles away. His words, whatever they were now, would be added to the record alongside the documents, and the record would outlast every version of this moment he could construct for himself. He sat with his hands flat on the table. Gerald Foss spoke for him. He said his client had no further statement at this time. Serene Flemming nodded once. She gathered the documents from the table and aligned them into a clean stack. She thanked Curtis Blackwell for his time with a professionalism so complete it left no room for interpretation. She told Gerald Foss that the formal civil rights complaint filed on behalf of Isadora Flemming had been transmitted to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, and that Blackwell would receive notification through proper channels. Then she stood, buttoned the bottom button of her jacket, and walked out of the room. Pastor Nathaniel Spears had been in the corridor for an hour by then. He was a tall man in his early 60s, a dark gray suit jacket over a white collared shirt, standing near the corridor's far window with his hands clasped in front of him, and his face carrying the expression of a man accustomed to waiting in difficult places for something worth waiting for. He had arrived 40 minutes after Serene Flemming, called by Dolores from the church directory before anyone had thought to call him, because communities like this one had systems that did not require official notification. When Isadora Flemming was walked out of the holding area to wait in the intake lobby while the interview concluded, Pastor Spears had come immediately to her side. He had not been loud about it. He had simply sat beside her, put his large hand briefly over her folded ones and said, "We're here." Though it was not just him. It was every family in the congregation who had a grandmother. It was every person who had walked into a public building to do an ordinary thing and had been made to feel like a trespass. When Serene Flemming came out of the corridor and into the intake lobby, she saw them sitting together, her grandmother upright, composed, her white button-down blouse still pressed despite everything, her navy skirt smooth, and beside her Pastor Spears, steady as a door frame. Serene Flemming looked at her grandmother and said, "We're ready to go." Isadora Flemming stood. She smoothed her skirt with both hands, a gesture so habitual it had become its own kind of statement. She looked at Serene Flemming with the full, clear-eyed attention of a woman who had never once in her 72 years confused movement for defeat. "Then let's go," she said. The sunlight outside Precinct 14 was direct and unambiguous in the way that mid-afternoon light in late autumn can be no warmth in it, but no pretending either. Just light on everything equally, making everything visible. Lena Kwon was waiting on the sidewalk. She was standing a respectful distance from the precinct entrance, her press badge visible against a dark green blazer over fitted black trousers, a voice recorder in her hand, and a stillness about her that said she had been a reporter long enough to know that the wrong approach at the wrong moment could close a door that might never open again. Serene Flemming came out first, followed by Vincent Hargrove, then Isadora Flemming with Pastor Spears beside her. The afternoon light caught all of them. Lena Kwon stepped forward a single step. "I understand if this isn't the right moment," she said. "But if you're willing, I have one question." Serene Flemming stopped. She looked at Lena Kwon for 2 seconds, reading her. Then she turned and looked at her grandmother. Isadora Flemming looked at the reporter. She looked at the voice recorder. She looked at the precinct door behind her and at the sidewalk beneath her feet and at the unremarkable Wednesday afternoon stretching out in all directions. She thought, perhaps, of 14 names she did not know yet. 14 other people who had sat on benches in holding cells with their hands folded, who had been logged as obstructions, who had been released within hours with no record of the truth. She nodded. "Go ahead," Isadora Flemming said. Her voice was clear and level and carried no performance in it whatsoever. "Ask your question." And the recorder was raised, and the light fell on all of them, and the truth was about to enter a record larger than any precinct log had ever been designed to hold. 3 weeks. That is how long it takes for the weight of a Wednesday morning to become something permanent, not in the way damage becomes permanent, but in the way truth does. The kind of truth that gets filed in triplicate, assigned a case number, and placed in a federal record that no one can walk back, shred, or explain away with careful language. The FBI's Civil Rights Division formally opened a pattern or practice investigation into Precinct 14 intake procedures on a Thursday morning, 14 days after Isadora Flemming sat in a holding cell with her hands folded and her dignity intact. The investigation was not a conversation. It was not a warning. It was a federal mechanism, slow, thorough, and irreversible, grinding through every intake log, every footage timestamp, every detention record that the precinct had accumulated, while supervisors signed papers they never read. Officer Curtis Blackwell was placed on administrative leave pending an internal affairs review. He was also the named subject of a federal civil rights complaint filed formally on behalf of Isadora Flemming. His union representative had done what union representatives do: made calls, filed paperwork, prepared arguments. None of it changed what the footage showed. None of it changed what 14 other detention logs confirmed. The complaint existed now. It had his name on it. It would follow him. Duty Sergeant Howard Bunch was reassigned pending review. He had signed the log without reading it, and that signature was now part of a federal record that described exactly what it meant to authorize something you never looked at. Lieutenant Douglas Prout had retained personal counsel. No further comment. And Officer Amara Diallo, who had watched from a corridor and known it was wrong, who had gone through a confiscated purse and found an emergency contact and made a phone call that would define her career, received a formal commendation entered into the FBI's investigative record. It was one paragraph. It was permanent. In that one paragraph, Amara Diallo's name was attached to the words moral courage and decisive action. And those words would outlast every uncomfortable moment she had endured in the weeks since she made the call. Reporter Lena Kwan's story ran nationally. It ran with Isadora Flemming's name spelled correctly, her age listed accurately, and her military family's history told with the weight it deserved. It ran with a photograph of 2 bronze stars. That story is still running somewhere right now. 12 blocks from Precinct 14, on a quiet street, where the morning light comes through the front window at an angle that warms the hardwood floor, Isadora Flemming's home looks exactly the same as it always has. The mantle is the same. 2 bronze stars in open cases, their velvet backing a little faded from 20 years of light. 2 photographs: Captain Yolanda Flemming in her dress uniform, chin level, eyes forward. The kind of photograph that asks nothing of the viewer but gives everything. And Warrant Officer Raymond Flemming mid-laugh at a base cookout, mouth open, head tilted back, as if someone had just said something so purely funny that his whole body had to participate in the response. They watch over the room. They always have. But today the room is not empty beneath their gaze. Serene Flemming is at the kitchen table in a soft burgundy top and dark jeans. Her jacket is over the back of the chair. Her badge is not on the table. Today she is not the FBI's assistant special agent in charge of anything. Today she is 27 years of a granddaughter who drove 12 blocks instead of 1,000 miles and is still somehow trying to close a distance that has no geography. Tobias Flemming is across from her in a gray sweater and dark trousers, his hands wrapped around a coffee mug that Isadora Flemming filled before he could ask. He drove through the night when Serene called him 3 weeks ago. He said he would come when things settled. Then he decided he did not want to wait for things to settle. He wanted to be here while they were still settling, while the family was still finding its footing. That is the kind of man he is, the kind who shows up in the process, not just the resolution. And Isadora Flemming is at the head of the table in her Sunday dress, the blue one with the white collar, the one she wears when something matters. She made breakfast because cooking is how she loves people. There is no occasion too large and no pain too recent for her to express love through a pan on the stove and a plate set down in front of someone. There is eggs and there is toast, and there is the kind of quiet that only exists in rooms where people are not performing for each other. Serene takes a slow breath. Tobias says something low and warm to his grandmother. Something about the toast, and Isadora Flemming dismisses the compliment with a wave of her hand, the way she always does, the wave that means she knows she is a good cook and does not need to discuss it. For a moment, the table is just noise and warmth, and the ordinary sounds of a family eating together on a weekday morning when all 3 of them happen to be in the same place at the same time, which does not happen often enough. Then Isadora Flemming looks up. She looks past the table, past the kitchen doorway, into the front room where the mantle is, where the bronze stars are, where Yolanda and Raymond are. She holds their gaze for a moment the way you hold the gaze of people you have been meaning to talk to, people you owe an update. Her voice is quiet. It is not a statement for the table. It is something older and more private than that. She says, "We're all right. We handled it. The kitchen does not stop. The toast is still warm. The coffee is still in Tobias's mug. The morning light is still coming through the front window at that angle that warms the floor." But Serene Flemming reaches across the table and covers her grandmother's hand with her own. She does not say anything. She does not have to. The loop closes here, not with sirens, not with a verdict read aloud in a crowded courtroom, not with anyone standing at a podium declaring that justice was served. It closes here, in this kitchen, with a 72-year-old woman who survived the worst things a mother can survive and still got up and made breakfast. Telling her children's photographs that the family held the line. Justice was not loud. It was documented, filed, and permanent, and the mantle has always had room for more than grief. It had room for this, too. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.